Hello, folks. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. I'm here with another interview. This time, I'm speaking to Charlotte Cates, the international co-ordinator for Samidoun. So, Charlotte, can you please inform the audience a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Sure. Well, my name is Charlotte Cates. I'm the international coordinator of Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network. And we're an international Arab and Palestinian network of organizations, activists, and organizers struggling to free Palestinian political prisoners as part and parcel of the struggle to liberate Palestine from the river to the sea. And we believe that the Palestinian prisoners, as representatives of the Palestinian resistance and as people who have been targeted for persecution, isolation by the Zionist regime, are central to the liberation struggle, not only as victims of the torture and abuse of the occupation on a daily basis, but also as leaders in the Palestinian resistance. So most of the work that we do, whether that's here on this land in Turtle Island or internationally, focuses on advocating for, drawing attention to, and highlighting the stories, the struggles, and the ongoing resistance of Palestinian political prisoners.
Thanks for that. And obviously, I think the important thing really is outright liberation of Palestine.
Absolutely.
Critical for more just future. So let's get on to the Liberation Conference. That's the main thing, folks in the audience. They did a conference between the 28th to 30th in Ottawa, and we're going to get all into that now. So this conference, when did the planning begin, and which groups led the way in initiating this effort?
Well, the planning for this conference began several months ago, specifically led by the Masar which is the Palestinian Alternative Revolutionary Path movement, coming out of discussions that followed the March for Return and Liberation and a week of actions for return and liberation that took place in Brussels at the end of October and beginning of November of 2022. The Masar is a Palestinian Arab and international movement that is working to stand and organize for the liberation of all of Palestine from the river to the sea, with clear principles of support for Palestinian resistance, rejection of imperialism, and rejection of the path of Oslo and the so-called peace process that has been used to really attempt to liquidate and dismantle the Palestinian national liberation movement. And so that is the purpose of the Masar, which was founded in October, November 2021 with conferences in Madrid, Beirut, and Sao Paulo in Brazil. So following this mass march, which drew over 1,000 people to march through the streets of Brussels to the European Parliament to stand, openly in support of the Palestinian resistance, including the Palestinian armed resistance for the liberation of all of Palestine from the river to the sea, which was led largely by Palestinian youth, Palestinian women's organizations in Europe. That there was a discussion about how can we have more local and regional conferences to activate this organizing and bring organizations together and activists together that are interested in strengthening our collective work for Palestinian liberation. So this conference was focused on doing that, but here in North America on Turtle Island.
Okay, so let's get into the planning process a little bit more. So when did momentum begin to build up in terms of getting this event towards full development?
So I would say that momentum has built up kind of over that time between the late 2022 and now, and many organizations have signed on. I think especially as more people have become aware in the weeks leading up to the conference itself. And we did receive endorsements from many organizations. The organization I represent, Samidoun, is one of those endorsers and co-sponsors of the conference that was led by the Masar Badil. And these included student organizations, community organizations, anti-imperialist groups, coalitions like the Canadian BDS Coalition. And it's important to note also organizations in the US and elsewhere as well that were part of endorsing and supporting the conference, like, for example, Al-Auda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition in the United States. And I think all of this has begun to develop momentum because this discussion about how not just the Palestinian movement for Palestinians, but also the Palestinian movement as an Arab actor, as a global actor, as an international force in the anti-imperialist movement, in the kind of global movement for social justice and confronting imperialism, Zionism, and reaction, can forge ahead, particularly separately from this path of a so-called peace process, which is clearly not bringing peace or justice to anyone in the region, and that has been used to kind of pigeonhole the Palestinian Liberation Movement for the past 30 years. We're coming up on the anniversary of the so-called Oslo Accords, the Declaration of Principles, signed at the White House on September 13th, 1993. We're coming up on that 30th anniversary this year. So there are many forces, individuals, organizations that are looking for and asking the question how to truly revive the Palestinian movement, especially on a political level, on an international level, especially to live up to the level of sacrifices and achievements that are being made by the Palestinian resistance, as we see every day inside Gaza, inside the West Bank, the level of sacrifices by Palestinians throughout occupied Palestine from the river to the sea, not to mention the role of the Lebanese resistance, the Arab resistance more broadly, and of Palestinians in exile and diaspora who have been politically cut off from having a leading role in the struggle, but have a major role to play in liberation, and who have been, by and large, the founders, the people pushing forward this concept of the Masada deal.
All right, so I want to ask now, why was Ottawa chosen as a location for the conference?
You know, we have been in touch with many organizations. One reason why it became almost practical that last year several of us visited Ottawa for the International League of People's Struggle Conference that took place in June of 2022, and had engaged in discussions with different organizations and individuals who were present at that conference. There's also a Samidoun chapter that's present here in Ottawa and was able to work on organizing it. In addition, it is the capital of Canada, and if we want to hold Canada accountable for its ongoing support of Zionist colonization, not to mention its own settler colonial role on this land, then Ottawa is a very appropriate place for us to convene this conference. The first Masara conference, the international one, was convened in Madrid as well as in Beirut and Sao Paulo, but that was marking the anniversary of the Madrid so-called peace talks, which of course were once again really talks for the liquidation of the Palestinian cause. And so just as there is a confrontational aspect, there's also a confrontational aspect of holding the conference in Ottawa as well.
All right, so let's get on to topics now. How were topics chosen for the conference?
Well, the topics that were chosen for the conference were essentially those that felt and seemed highly relevant to the struggle of Palestinians today and to the international and Arab movement supporting the Palestinian cause. So, for example, talking about the connection and relationships struggle between the Palestinian movement and Black liberation movements and Indigenous liberation movements. There are decades and decades of collective histories of joint struggle. And so how do we learn from those histories and build on them moving forward to really pose an effective challenge that magnifies the work of all of these movements in confronting imperialist power, like right here in the center of the imperial core. In addition, we also talked about how Palestine is an anti-imperialist cause, specifically hearing about the work and organizing of the International People's Tribunal on US imperialism, sanctions, blockades, coercive economic measures. Samidoun is one of the co-sponsors of that tribunal, as is the Masara as a movement. So putting it into that global context was very important for us. We talked about the internal Palestinian political scene and the next steps forward, as well as having a series of open discussions on this topic because of all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. This is a critically important moment in terms of talking about how we move forward and how we build together as a movement And so by having that discussion without the way that it's often presented in kind of like mainstream media or in liberal accounts, we're able to talk more about what that actually means, especially in terms of how it's possible to support the Palestinian resistance and how it's possible to support resistance forces in the region in a meaningful way, especially on the political level and on the social level of building an international base of support for the resistance. You know, we talked about issues such as the Palestinian youth and student movement, building and escalating the boycott campaign, particularly in labor, in universities, and a number of other social sectors. You know, we heard from the Canadian BDS Coalition, Labor for Palestine, and Students for Justice in Palestine in that regard. We also talked about kind of a wide variety of topics, but all around this theme of the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, joint struggle with other liberation movements, and building our collective struggle to confront imperialism, Zionism, and reaction. And of course, this conference was also being held leading up to International Workers' Day, May Day. So talking about the historic and present role of the Palestinian popular classes and working class, who have always been the sectors of Palestinian society that have given the martyrs and prisoners and fighters that have propelled the movement forward for the past 75 years of ongoing Nakba.
All right, thanks for taking the audience through this. One thing that just popped up in terms of a question is, you know, I've kept an eye on the actions of, you know, Palestine Action in the United Kingdom. They've taken some really strong, you know, actions, and they've really pounded their feet to the ground. Do you think there's some lessons for the, you know, success they've actually managed to have in their time so far?
There's absolutely a lot of lessons to be taken from this work. We view the work of Palestine Action as incredibly important, and we also view the arrestees and those who've been detained in British jails as a result of Palestine Action actions to be political prisoners of the Palestinian Liberation Movement, you know, side by side with Palestinians who are being locked behind bars in Zionist occupation prisons. The escalation that Palestine Action has taken in terms of really centering in on a clear target, which is particularly Elbit Systems, the arms industry more broadly, this system and profiteering from death and destruction, not only in Palestine, but around the world where these weapons are sold as being battle tested on Palestinians, by actually, you know, causing physical, material damage to these weapons of war is absolutely, I think, something that people here and elsewhere very much want to say, how can we take this model and implement it in a way that makes sense and fits with our strategies in different countries. And we think that this is something that needs a lot of publicity and attention. You know, one of the first steps, it's kind of a smaller step, it doesn't compare to what they're doing in Palestine Action, but we do officially support the Stop CanSec action that's going to be taking place in Ottawa on May 31st. And CanSec is a big arms dealing kind of fair, which is including Elbit Systems, the same company that is being targeted by Palestine Action to promote their wares. And last year, the demonstration was able to shut down the CanSec conference for at least a few hours. We want to do the same thing again this year, and actually try to block those weapons deals from taking place at Ottawa and at CanSec. And so it's a first step in that direction, but it is looking towards what they're doing in Palestine Action. And of course, today is May 1st. They're launching a new siege on Elbit starting today. And we think everyone should be following those actions and doing everything that we can, even if folks may not have the mobilization and forces and readiness, or maybe the same legal strategy to pursue those tactics at this moment, that we have to, at the very minimum, provide all the moral, political, and strategic support to Palestine Action that we can.
All right, so now let's shift to one of the unfortunate negative aspects. The conference, of course, was subject to a piece by the National Post, which is written by Kara Glavin, who even the campus has had a number of run-ins with. So Samidoun, yourself, Khalid Barakat, and Samidoun were attacked in the conference via the attack on the name individuals and organizations. How do you and other organizations of the conference respond to allegations made?
Well, this isn't the first time that Terry Glavin has attacked the Palestine movement or has even attacked Khaled Barakat personally. They ran a front page article in the National Post around a year ago attempting to criminalize Khaled Barakat and target him for his work. This has also come hand in hand with very specific campaigns and demands by right-wing Zionist organizations, including CIJA and B'nai B'rith, which, hand in hand with the publication of these articles, issued demands to deport Khaled Barakat or issued demands to list Samidoun as a terrorist organization. Why? Because we call for the freedom of Palestinian prisoners. Obviously, this isn't just an attack on Samidoun, on the Massar, or even on Palestine organizing. It's clearly an attempt to attack any form of freedom of expression and association for people who are advocating for things that run counter to Canadian imperialist interests, which work as a subsidiary of U.S. imperialist interests. I mean, Terry Glavin, when he's not engaging in a smear campaign against the Palestinian movement, he's out there every day on Twitter trying to urge war with China and war with Iran. So this is the same tactic that comes hand in hand with it, essentially attacking all of the enemies of imperialism. And so, to a large extent, these so-called allegations are of things like stating that we support the Palestinian resistance, we affirm Palestinians' right to resist by any means necessary, that we stand with Palestinian prisoners, that Glavin, the National Post, and pro-Zionist organizations want to declare to be terrorists. Well, we're not ashamed of saying that we support the resistance. We're not ashamed of upholding Palestinians, for that matter, internationally recognized right to resist occupation and oppression by any means necessary, including armed struggle. We are definitely not ashamed of supporting Palestinian political prisoners. We view that as absolutely critical to the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. And the real problem is, is actually like the state policy that exists. So, for example, we have this so-called terrorist entities list in Canada that is used to, list a few like fascist or violent right-wing groups, but then is also by and large used mostly to list resistance organizations, particularly in Palestine and Lebanon and elsewhere in the region. And this entire terrorist list is set up as a mechanism to try to suppress people's ability to build ties and build relationships with the forces that are actually doing the most to fight for liberation on the ground. And we can clearly see that this isn't some kind of pacifist approach when we see the way that the Canadian state not only has not hesitated to throw money and arms in order to fuel conflict in Ukraine, but also openly urge people to donate personal money to buy more bombs and weapons and ship them in to fulfill the mandate of NATO. So we clearly see that this isn't informed by some kind of concern about violence. Instead, the entire purpose of this so-called terror entities list, and particularly listing liberation organizations on it, they're listing movements and organizations struggling for national liberation and sovereignty of colonized peoples, that this and fighting against invading Zionist forces that have been engaging in 75 years of ethnic cleansing, colonialism, and genocide against the Palestinian people, not to mention against the Arab people more broadly. So listing these organizations as terrorist is just an attempt to create fear and an attempt to silence people. We know that everything that we're doing is perfectly legal, but the fact is that organizations like B'nai B'rith and CIJA and right-wing newspapers like the National Post, when they're not trying to stir up war drives against every country that refuses imperialist dictates, very much want to criminalize public political advocacy for the liberation of Palestine that upholds the legitimacy of the resistance. And that's something that everybody should be concerned about.
For sure, and I think an important thing for people to remember too is in terms of liberating Palestine, first of all, that of course, Israeli apartheid is not going to just end by, vigiling away, right? Of course, it's great that people
Right.
care, but, people on the ground in Palestine facing the gun of imperialism to their head right away, you know, asking, Israel politely to stop is, it's not going to work. So what do you expect from people, then go ahead
Right.
and criminalize folks for defending themselves any way they can? It's truly a ridiculous
Right.
thing. And the state just goes ahead and does the same, Canada just goes ahead and does the same thing. Because let's be real here, having Canada having Israeli apartheid in the region, it's in its interest. They can use it against
Absolutely.
the U.S., Canada, the West. Supports Israel because it can be used against Iran. It can be used against Lebanon. It's a pernicious force in the region, and it's just part of geopolitics. But of course, the people that are there, they get horribly hurt, and Palestinians suffer so deeply for the apartheid.
As has been said, so-called Israel is like the world's largest aircraft carrier. Well, but the people of the region don't want to live under an aircraft carrier. They want to have self-determination and sovereignty over their land. Every day, Palestinians live with home demolitions, with occupation forces shooting people in the streets, with thousands of people being carted off to prison and locked behind bars. With just this fundamental denial of sovereignty and self-determination over every part of daily life and over the land. And so, Palestinians are resisting in every single way possible. They're, writing art, they're writing articles, they're creating art, they're making music, they're engaging in cultural resistance, they're organizing trade unions, labor organizations, women's organizations, student organizations. They're, advocating at the United Nations, and there are also and centrally, building the battle of armed struggle and resistance. And right now we see in Gaza, for example, the strength of the resistance in Gaza that was certainly built in alliance with other regional resistance forces and is now able to sustain itself. Well, there's a reason why Israel isn't doing land invasions of Gaza anymore. And that's because they can't, because the resistance is that strong. And now we're seeing a growth and strength and resistance in the West Bank. These are very important times and very important manifestations that are not merely symbolic, but also have a material effect on the balance of power inside occupied Palestine and throughout the region. And so it's critical that these forces, which again are completely legitimate under international law, are recognized for what they are. Freedom fighters and defense forces. The only real defense forces in occupied Palestine are the Palestinian resistance.
All right, so let's get back to the conference a bit. So the Return and Liberation March that ended off the weekend. Take us through that rally. How did it go?
Sure. Well, it was a very rainy day. It was kind of awful weather in Ottawa, but it was still a strong march and rally. It was attended by a variety of different organizations, including leftist political parties, Palestine advocates, as well as organizers who came from both Toronto and Montreal to also be part of this march and rally. And marching from the Human Rights Monument essentially through central Ottawa and to the US Embassy and other locations to make a loud, clear message on the streets that we stand for the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, to show that we stand with the Palestinian resistance and carrying forward this message that's kind of throughout the conference, which is for return and liberation, but also recognizing that this is taking place a day before May 1st, International Workers' Day. So situating the Palestinian struggle within that context of being a liberation struggle that is also a working class struggle and a struggle that's relevant to the workers of the world and an opportunity to build international solidarity. And we believe that our voices were heard by people, and we did receive support from the vast majority of people that we saw on the streets. And marching with huge Palestinian flags, large banners, and a clear message of solidarity. And especially as this is coming 2 weeks before the commemoration of the 75th year of the ongoing Nakba against the Palestinian people, that we also saw this as an event that's building up towards the marches and rallies that will happen, particularly in Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, as well as many places around the world on that anniversary in 2 weeks.
So I want to ask, looking more broadly, what do you think the impact of this conference will be going forward?
Well, we, at this conference, we issued a declaration and a number of resolutions. And of course, those are just words, but the point of this declaration and the resolutions is to put them into practice. There were many organizations, over 25 organizations, that were present at the conference. And by working together to implement those declarations, those resolutions, we believe that we actually did achieve an important goal of establishing the Masarba deal in North America on Turtle Island. We also believe that we achieved an important goal in bringing people together and having very serious conversations, strategic conversations about the current day strategy for the liberation of Palestine, particularly as it can be practiced here in Palestinian communities in diaspora, in the broader Arab community, and in the international solidarity movement. And so, whether that's coming to our next convening, planning for how we're going to commemorate the 30th anniversary of Oslo, but also how we're going to build and organize together to build the mass base necessary to support the movement and work together with the many organizations that are doing important work in this regard on this continent, internationally, and inside occupied Palestine and among Palestinians in diaspora, that we believe we've built a strong foundation to move forward from and to make all of our collective movement for the liberation of Palestine stronger.
All right, so let's head off to the end of this interview. So how can folks stay in touch with the work of Samidoun, Masarba deal, yourself, and Mr. Khaled Barakat?
Well, if you'd like to follow Samidoun, please visit our website at samidoun.net. That's SAMIDOUN.net. You can also follow us on Instagram at Samidoun Network and stay in touch with us. We encourage you to send us an email, to communicate with us, to send us a DM. We have built chapters in countries across Europe, in Latin America, as well as in occupied Palestine, as well as here. We'd love to talk with folks who are interested in starting a new Samidoun chapter, or in your existing organization, partnering together to work on projects, particularly that focus on the struggle of the Palestinian political prisoners as part and parcel of the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. And if you'd like to stay in touch with the Masarba deal, please visit their website at masarbadil.org. That's MASARBADIL.org, or follow them on Instagram at Masarbadil. And you can follow the Masar, stay in touch. Once again, please send an email, send a DM, get in touch, because we want to talk about how we can build together, because only by strengthening our relationships, the Palestinian resistance always talks about the unity of all fronts. Well, we view the role of this conference, the role of the Masar, and also the role of Samidoun as building the unity of all fronts and arenas of struggle right here on this land as well. So the more that we can work together, build together, and organize together with the liberation of Palestine as our guidestone, the more we'll be able to accomplish those necessary goals of defeating Zionism, defeating imperialism, and viewing a real liberated Palestine from the river to the sea within our lifetime.
All right, thank you very much there. For the Camp Fellows folks and people in the audience, this journalism, it takes money. We've been able to do critical interviews, analysis, investigations over 3+ years of the Camp Fellows' existence. If you want to support our work, go to the donor box link below in the description, set up a monthly or annual donation. It helps us grow our work and grow the Canada Files. So, Mrs. Cates, thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us, and please do continue to support the Canada Files and its important journalism.
All right, thanks, Ms. Cates, and thanks for the audience for sticking all the way to the end. Goodbye.